Okay, welcome to this week's lesson all about nuclear fission. Now I find this a very interesting topic, and it's one of the ways now that we generate electricity in this country. We've had nuclear fission reactors like this for about 50 to 60 years. About 20% of the energy in the UK, or electricity in the UK, is generated in these nuclear power plants. They have good points and bad points. The good points about nuclear power like this is that it doesn't produce carbon dioxide, so it has very little impact on global warming. But the downside is that we do get nuclear waste. But we'll discuss that in another lesson. First of all, this picture here is Sellafield Nuclear Power Plant. This is located in the Lake District, on the other side of the Lake District. This round dome here is the nuclear reactor. This is where nuclear fission takes place, and I want to use this video today to explain nuclear fission. Okay, so what do we mean by fission? Fission literally means to split apart. The opposite of fission is fusion, which will be the subject of another video. So let's have a look at this graphic here, and I want to just explain one or two things about this to you. So looking at this, we can see a slow-moving neutron, and we need a large nucleus of uranium there. So in order to make fission happen, you've got to fire a slow-moving neutron at the uranium. It's got to be slow-moving, and we say that fission is induced. What does that mean? It means that it won't happen naturally by itself. We have to make it happen. We have to fire a slow-moving neutron at the uranium to cause fission. The uranium will then absorb that neutron and ultimately split in half roughly and get two daughter nuclei, and we will also get some fast-moving neutrons produced as well. Okay, so let's look at why it has to be a slow-moving neutron and not a fast-moving neutron. If we were to fire a fast-moving neutron at the nucleus of uranium-235, it would go straight through. I know this may be slightly hard to believe, but it just passes straight through the nucleus. It doesn't get absorbed. It's not captured by the nucleus, and therefore it doesn't split. However, if we have a slow-moving neutron, it's moving slow enough that it gets captured by the uranium, and it forms temporarily, just before it splits, it forms an unstable nuclei of uranium-236, which then is unstable and it splits in half. Okay, let's look at the process of nuclear fission in a bit more detail. We can see on here a slow-moving neutron. It approaches this larger uranium-235. This is uranium-235. It only works with uranium-235, not any other isotope of uranium. And temporarily, the neutron is absorbed into uranium-235 to make an unstable nucleus of uranium-236. Now, this does not last very long. It immediately splits in half to produce two fragments, okay, here and here. This one is called barium, and the other one down here is called krypton. They're not exactly the same size. We also get two fast-moving neutrons. Now, in fact, this particular example that I'm going to show you here, if I move on, you can see that we get two neutrons. The diagram shows three. That's because there are slightly different processes. Fission doesn't go by one route. There are different routes, and so for our example, that shouldn't be three there. That should be two fast-moving neutrons. But sometimes you get different isotopes and you get three fast-moving neutrons. Okay, let's look at this process again with an animation. So, as I've said already, we start with a slow-moving neutron over here. Okay, that then collides with a large nucleus of uranium-235. The neutron is absorbed and to produce an unstable nucleus of uranium-236. As I said before, this does not last very long. It immediately splits into two daughter nuclei, okay, barium and krypton. We also get a lot of energy produced in this nuclear reaction, and it's the energy which we want. It's useful, we can use that, and we can harness that energy, and we can turn it into electrical energy in a nuclear power station. Now this is a chain reaction because we started with one neutron at the beginning, but we now end up with 3 neutrons at the end. Each of these neutrons can go on, they can induce fission in more nuclei, and we get an uncontrollable, if we're not careful, an uncontrolled chain reaction where we get more and more energy being produced, and that can be very useful or very destructive depending on how well we control that. Okay, let's look at what we mean by a chain reaction, looking at this animation. So we start with a neutron, as I said before, a slow moving neutron, okay, and that collides with a large uranium-235 nucleus that splits into two daughter barium and krypton energy in the form of kinetic energy of neutrons. We get 2 or 3 neutrons produced in a fission event like that. Each one of those will go on, it will collide with more uranium-235. Each of those will split, releasing lots of energy, and you can see that before we know it, we've got more energy than we know what to do with. Okay, let's look at how a nuclear reactor actually works. You need to know just this in broad detail, just what the basic parts of it actually do. So this over here is the reactor vessel. Often this is a large circular building. If you've ever driven past a nuclear reactor, you'll notice there's a large circular dome. Inside of that there is a nuclear reactor. The dome is the shielding, and you can see here thick concrete shielding to absorb neutrons. They're very safe places, the radiation can't get out, there's very thick concrete. Okay, so they are very, very safe. Now, there are 3 parts of this that you need to be aware of. So let's get rid of that red mark, use a different color. Firstly, the uranium fuel. So we've got in here rods, here, here, and here, which is uranium-235. We call it enriched uranium because only uranium-235 will work in a nuclear reactor. We also have control rods. Control rods can move up or down, and we've got 1, 2, 3 control rods in this diagram, and they can be moved up, which makes the reaction proceed faster, or they can be lowered, which stops the reaction from taking place. We also have, I'm going to mark it in yellow, so this grey block here, here and here, this is called the moderator. Now you need to know what these 3 things do. Okay, you need to be clear on what these 3 parts do. So uranium fuel rods, I think, is fairly obvious. That's where the uranium-235 is. That's where the fission is actually taking place. Slightly more complicated one is the control rods. So these control rods, as I said, if they get lowered down, they stop the chain reaction from taking place. How do they do that? Because they absorb the neutrons. So the boron will absorb the neutrons and it will stop the chain reaction, and that will make the reactor completely safe. If we raise the control rods, the reaction then speeds up, and if we're not careful, if they're raised completely up and they're left up, you get an uncontrolled chain reaction leading to a nuclear meltdown, which we don't want to happen. The other thing here, as we mentioned, is the graphite moderator. Now, if we go back to the previous equation, you'll notice that we need a slow-moving neutron to cause nuclear fission. but you get 3 or 2 fast-moving neutrons. So we need to slow the fast-moving neutrons down if we're going to get a chain reaction, and that's what this graphite moderator does. It absorbs some of the kinetic energy of the fast-moving neutrons, and they slow down, and then they can go on and they can be absorbed by other uranium-235, causing a chain reaction and more nuclear fission. Okay, let's have a look at how the reactor core works. I'm just going to quickly go over those key points again, just so that you're clear. Okay, so we've got fuel rods, and the fuel rods would be these orange ones in this diagram. They contain enriched uranium-235. We then have control rods, which can be raised or lowered. So these are the black things. These can go up or down. If they go up, more neutrons can spread out, and they can cause more, a greater and a faster chain reaction. We then have a moderator. Now the moderator, normally graphite or carbon, as I've said here, is the grey material that's around the rods, both the fuel rods and the control rods. The moderator slows down those fast-moving neutrons so that they can be absorbed by the uranium-235 and cause fission. Now the whole point of this is that a lot of energy is produced in the form of kinetic energy of neutrons, but that will quickly become heat energy, and so what we want to do in a nuclear power station is transfer the heat that's being generated in the reactor and turn it into electrical energy. So how do we generate electricity from nuclear fission? Well, let's have a look at this diagram here. You just need to understand the basics of this. In fact, nuclear power stations work very much like a coal-fired power station, but the source of heat is different. The heat comes from the reactor. I've already explained how we get fast-moving neutrons. They have lots of kinetic energy. They keep colliding with uranium nuclei. A lot of heat energy is being generated. So we can pass steam or water around the reactor vessel. Okay, that water or steam gets very, very hot, passes up through here. This is a heat exchanger, and some of the heat is spread into water. So there's this water or steam in the pipe is not allowed out because it could become radioactive. It's in contact, it could have radioactive material in it. So it has to be contained inside the dome. But this super hot steam or super hot water, the heat from it can pass into water which comes from the outside, and this water then heats up and turns into steam, and as it goes around here it will cause these turbines to spin very, very quickly, and then the steam or the water is cooled and it will go back into the heat exchanger again. So we've made the turbine here spin very, very rapidly. It's connected to a generator. The generator will spin very rapidly, and we can therefore turn that kinetic energy into electrical energy, and the electrical energy is distributed across the country on the national grid.